Hi, I'm Draven. I typically make high gain amp demos here on YouTube, but today I'm going to show you a couple of just little tips and tricks that I do with Midi drums that kind of change everything, honestly. For me personally, having like a really good drum sound as the base of your demo or your mix is like super important. So yeah, I'm going to show you a couple of things that I do pretty much every time that almost always just bring it all to life and stuff. Yeah, so let's dive in and hopefully you find it helpful. Alright, so just as like a small refresh, this is the demo of the Jackson from last week. And so these are the drums that I'm going to be showing you, like how I got the whole thing to sound the way it does. So I guess we'll start off with kind of what all I did with the drums processing wise, and then we'll go in and I'll show you what I do with like the MIDI and stuff like that. So for drums, we're using Mixwave's Weinberg kit, which I did some slight tweaking to, which we'll go through. And I also layered it, so I have like this snare, which I think is the steel snare, and then I layered in this snare as well. And then I also grabbed the Gojira kit, borrowed a snare from that as well, and then we used the ride from that. So we're not using any of the other stuff from this second kit. And we're not using the ride from this first kit. We're using it on the Gojira kit. So I'll turn off these extra plugins and show you what it sounds like with just those, like with just the drums. And so in the first kit, all I did was turned the kick drum down a little bit, brought the overheads and rooms down a little bit, and then turned the snare down, turned the bottom mic down and room down, and it looks like I turned the effects up slightly. I think I left everything else the same. Turned the hi-hat down a little bit, because I feel like every time I open a preset for drum libraries, the hi-hat is always like super loud. So just turn that down a little bit. I also turned it down in the overheads. The compression is off. These EQ and tape settings are just stock, whatever. And then so on the second kit, it's just the snare. I turned down the second top mic and bottom mic, and then I turned down the overall thing to just kind of blend it with the rest. And then for the Gojira kit, it's just the snare and ride, which I turned down the snare, the overheads, the bottom, the room, and looks like I didn't touch the ride at all. I did on the second snare, did like turn up the snare effects quite a bit, which I can show you what each snare sounds like by themselves. I just blend them together so that way it makes one full sound. So here is the first snare. The second snare. And then the third snare. And then all the snares together by themselves. So it's just kind of like making a full snare drum sound that's kind of unique. Yeah, and then like I said, I used the ride from the Gojira kit. think that's about all I did in here. And so after that, I went into this, which is the JST bus glue drums. And this is just doing some parallel compression on the drums. I feel like it just gives it some space. It's pretty subtle, but I feel like it makes a difference. And then we have Finality by JST, which is kind of like a limiter, and that's just kind of taming the attack of the snare drum. And then I put R bass on it, since I wasn't, usually when I'm doing drums, I'll take all the drums out of the plugin and do them and mix them separately and stuff like that. But in this, I wanted to just keep it as simple as possible. And so in that, I wasn't really able to do too much with the kick drum, so I just used R bass to bring up the low end of it. Just makes it all a little like larger sounding. And then we have C6 for, there's like double bass parts where the low end can like build up. And so I just use C6 to lightly tame those. Just so it doesn't get overwhelming. And that's about it for like plugins and mixing techniques. I feel like the biggest part of this though is the Midi. So I'm going to show you the beginning of this song with what I did already, and then with just the stock plugin with no extra like editing to the Midi, just so you can hear the difference. So here is the beginning of that song as it is now. And then this is how it would sound if I didn't do anything extra to it. And real quick, we'll go back to the other one just for a comparison. Alright, and so the thing that I did with this, and what you can do with pretty much all of your drums, a main thing being, if we go in here, you can see all of the Midi is just the same velocity. So a big thing to do there would be like, say you have this this build up, right? The first hit might be really hard, but your second hit is definitely not going to be as hard as the first one. And doing a build up like this, it just sounds super robotic. So what you can do is you can just take each one and make it a slightly different velocity. And even if you're not necessarily making it like a full-on build-up, it'll still sound like more realistic. So it just like adds a level of a human sound to it. So you can go through and do that to all of your drums. A thing that I recommend a lot is if you have one hit like close to each other, you would take whatever hit that is on like a main note, and that would be your hard hit, and then the one next to it would be a softer hit. So here, for instance, you could take the second hit and bring it down a little bit. and then this hit is on a main beat, so I would take the first one and lower it. And then again, on this one, the main hit is in the middle, so lowering the two surrounding it would be what I would do. And so you can go, like I said, throughout the entire song and just slightly do that kind of thing, and you're going to sound a lot better. Another thing is if you have parts like this at the beginning where it's like there's no cymbals or anything like that, and it's just like a single snare hit, you can go in and you'll have to raise this a bit, but you can go in and add a lighter hit before the main hit, and it'll give the effect of a flam, which sounds like this. It just makes it sound more interesting. So you can do that in like areas like that. And it's just a fun way to like spice up some parts. And then one of my favorite things to do, especially for like big like tom hits, is to like zoom in a bit, turn off the snap, and then just slightly move each of the pieces around, just like slightly off beat, and it makes it sound not only more real but larger. Yeah, just a lot less stiff. And then another quick thing we can go over is, say you have a hi-hat part like this. You can create a lot of like movement in that by going through and selecting certain notes to be softer, and you can make it have like much more of like a swing feel or something. Just, again, less stiff. I think the last two things that I would say with midiing drums is pretty much never crank the velocity of the kick drum. A lot of plugins that I've come across, they work kind of best or sound kind of best around 100 most of the time, and then you can go down from there to add dynamics. I feel like usually when you like really crank it, it just sounds kind of silly. And then with snare drums, a lot of the time, I mostly, like if it's a hard hit, I just have it at full velocity, aside from, you know, if we've got like flam hits like I showed you, you want that first hit to be slightly softer, or like drum fills with flam hits. You want to like think about it in a way of, most of the time a drummer is like, if they're right-handed, their right hand is going to be stronger than the left, and most drum parts alternate between the left and right hand. So you'll want to add, you know, your first hit is going to be probably strongest, and then the left hit is going to be weaker. So like there, for instance. And then you can also transfer that to toms and kick drums. Again, if you're doing like fast ride stuff like this, I find that it works best if every second hit that are close together, just lower the velocity of it. And then like bell hits, I usually just leave pretty high velocity. Yeah, and that's just a couple of things that I do with MIDI drums that I feel like play a huge part in making them sound good or realistic. Let me know if there's any of these tips that you want me to elaborate on more, or any tips of your own that you want to share. Hopefully this was helpful.